Tonight on Primetime, after the most serious direct confrontation between Iran and Israel since April, the guns have fallen silent. So is this real de-escalation or just a pause before the next crisis? Well, good evening. Iran and Israel say they've halted attacks against each other after a day of sharp escalation raised fears of a wider conflict. Well, the pause followed calls from US President Donald Trump, although both sides are warning they could resume military action if the other strikes again.
Iran and Israel have announced a halt to attacks following nearly 24 hours of direct military confrontation. Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters said on Monday that it was suspending strikes against Israel after what it described as a response to Israeli military actions in Lebanon. The statement warned that any further Israeli attacks would trigger a much stronger reaction. Israeli media, citing a senior official, reported that Israel also suspended its strikes on Iran at the request of US President Donald Trump. However, the official said Israel would continue high-intensity operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and could expand strikes if attacks on Israeli territory continue. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the fighting with Iran was currently on hold, but warned that Israel would retaliate if Iran launched further attacks.
After Iran attacked Israel, I instructed the IDF to strike military and economic targets throughout Iran. We did that as well. At the moment, the fire has ceased, because after we struck the terrorist regime in Tehran, it stopped attacking us. If the terrorist regime makes the mistake of attacking us again, we will respond with force. Because Israel has the full right to self-defense, and we exercise it whenever necessary. I say this to you, dear citizens of Israel, just as I say it with appreciation and respect in my good conversations with my friend, President Trump.
The latest crisis began on Sunday evening when Iran launched ballistic missiles at northern Israel, saying the attack was retaliation for Israeli military operations in southern Lebanon. Iran carried out further strikes on Monday, targeting military sites and industries. Israel responded with airstrikes on military targets in Iran, including air defense systems, saying the operation was aimed at reducing threats to Israeli security. The exchange marked the most serious direct confrontation between the two countries since a ceasefire was reached in April.
Well, Tehran has rejected a new round of EU sanctions, accusing European governments of double standards and defending what it says are its sovereign rights in the Strait of Hormuz. Toraj Shirililo reports.
The Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal Affairs, Kazem Garibabadi, has strongly condemned the move by the Council of European Union to sanction Iranian individuals and an entity in relation with the Strait of Hormuz, linking the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. In a post on the platform X, it stressed that Iran does not attach any value to the political and hypocritical move and will continue its strategy of maintaining sovereignty and exercising sovereign rights over the Strait of Hormuz. His statement was made after the European bloc imposed on Monday sanctions on a Revolutionary Guards Navy unit and 2 Iranian individuals, accusing them of supporting measures that restrict navigation through the maritime corridor. Garibabadi branded the European states as major violators of the Iranian people's rights because of their deliberate silence regarding the US naval blockade of the Iranian southern ports, which he termed an act of war. Addressing the legal status of the crucial global shipping lanes, the senior Iranian diplomat reminded that Tehran is not a party to the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. According to the Iranian official, the legal regime emphasized by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz is innocent passage based on customary international law and observance of the coastal state's maritime safety and security considerations. Innocent passage is a concept in law of the sea that allows vessels to pass through the territorial sea of another state, subject to certain restrictions. It applies to the entire territorial sea up to at most 12 nautical miles from coastal baseline. Refuting the move by the European Union's legislative body, the Iranian official also noted that unilateral coercive measures do not create law. Rather, they can be the source of international responsibility for their authors. The U.S. blockade of Iran's ports and Tehran's grip over the Strait of Hormuz have created a gridlock that is neither peace nor raging conflict, as has been the case in weeks of trading attacks between the Iranian and U.S. militaries amid a fragile ceasefire. The standoff has also endangered the energy security of the European countries already facing backlashes of the Russia-Ukraine war. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back with you in just a few moments' time. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we're recording Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan,
Tehran,
Islamabad, Istanbul.
Kabul for A News.
Well, after nearly 24 hours of direct exchanges between Iran and Israel, both sides say they have halted attacks. Well, the pause came after intervention from US President Donald Trump, but neither side is presenting it as a lasting settlement. Tehran is warning of a stronger response if attacked again, while Israel says military action remains an option and continues operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. So while the immediate crisis may have eased, questions remain about what was achieved, who gained leverage, and whether the underlying drivers of the confrontation have changed at all. Well, joining us now is Nikola Mikovic, political analyst who is in Belgrade, Serbia for us. Mr. Mikovic, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to have you with us tonight on Primetime. Both Iran and Israel then are claiming success, aren't they? No surprise there. But in strategic terms, at the moment, who do you think is actually achieving more from this confrontation?
I think Israel is achieving more, that's undoubtedly, because Iran still lacks air defense systems, which is quite amazing. The Islamic Republic had literally 50 years to prepare for this war, but it's quite obvious now that they're not ready yet because they lack proper air defense systems and they don't even have bomb shelters, which is very interesting. The country that could expect to launch or to get involved into direct war with the United States and Israel didn't even build proper bomb shelters. So of course it is Israel that has a significant advantage that managed to destroy Iranian military and some civilian infrastructure, while Iran to some extent can cause certain damage to Israel, but not nearly as significant as Israel can do to the Islamic Republic. And who's to blame for that? Well, the Islamic Republic's leadership, obviously, because, as I said, they had more than 50 years to prepare for this, but they don't even have the very basic equipment, the very basic air defense systems. They managed to sometimes down Israeli drones, but not more than that. They couldn't shoot down any Israeli jets. Israel can freely fly over Iran. And Iran, on the other hand, does not even have a proper military aviation. So, of course, it is Israel that's in a much better position, and Israel is inflicting severe losses on the Islamic Republic, and that was the case in the previous war last year and also this year, and I'm sure that will be the case in the future as well.
Although the leadership's still there, isn't it? So, Mr. Trump talks about, in very sort of superlative terms, about the enormous scale of the forces against Iran, about, how Iran is just going to be blown out of the sky and all this sort of stuff. But the Iran's government is still there. So for them, just surviving, I suppose, could be considered to be a victory. We still don't have a deal, which is something that Mr. Trump clearly wants. So do you not think, in a sense, Iran is strategically in an increasingly strong position?
Well, you're right. For the Iranian government, it is a victory that they are still alive, because the United States and Israel could assassinate them at any time. And I think the reason why they're not doing that is because they need someone to negotiate with. And it's obvious that those people who are now in charge are willing to make at least some deals with Washington, even though Iran repeatedly stated that it does not want to negotiate with the United States. They even said that they don't plan to participate in the World Cup in the United States and Mexico, but their team is there. So I think we shouldn't take their rhetoric seriously, but at the same time, we shouldn't take Donald Trump too seriously, because one day he can tell you that he's willing to negotiate, and tomorrow he can bomb his opponents. So the whole situation is quite confusing, although what we can see on the ground is that it is Iran that's suffering as a result of this conflict, because not a single American city has been bombed, but a lot of Iranian cities have been bombed over the past few months. And how many U.S. soldiers died as a result of this war? Maybe a dozen or so. On the other hand, thousands of Iranians have killed. So it's quite obvious that Iran is in a much worse position, and that the U.S. can really do what Donald Trump said, and that's to turn the country back into the Stone Age. Now, that does not necessarily mean that they will do that, but they certainly do have the capacity to do that.
And this sense in which President Trump has sort of stepped in, and if you like, do you think that we're in danger of sort of overplaying that? I mean, he seems to have played some kind of role in stopping further escalation, or at least that's how it appears. Do you think this kind of strengthens Washington's position as a regional mediator?
Well, I think the United States at this point is not ready to resume its full-scale military operation against Iran, which is why it allowed Israel to launch a new wave of strikes, but the United States did not directly get involved, at least for now. But in the future, when they produce more missiles and when they're ready, I'm sure they will join Israel, and we'll have an escalation that you mentioned. The United States at this point is not, in my view, willing to end this conflict for the very simple reason it hasn't achieved its strategic goals in Iran. Yes, the previous leadership of the Islamic Republic has been assassinated, but in spite of that, the system is still there. It remains intact. And to force Iran to change its geopolitical and every other political course, the only way to do that is to have a pro-American puppet government in Tehran, but I think it's impossible to do that without U.S. troops on the ground or without proxy forces. But it doesn't seem realistic at this point, because there's no actor in Iran willing to play a role of the proxy, at least at this point. That might change in the future if the U.S. and Israel continue weakening Iran's military capabilities. But at this point, that's the situation. So the U.S. simply had to take a break and to prepare for another round of confrontation.
And Nicola, what's your analysis of the situation in Lebanon? I mean, there was a time, there have been many times over the period of this conflict, where some analysts have suggested, well, this is a separate confrontation. It's not the same as the main conflict between Israel and the US and Iran, but it does now seem to be an integral part of the same conflict. I mean, what's your view?
Well, as you may remember, when the U.S. and Iran reached a ceasefire deal, Tehran's condition was that Lebanon must be involved, that this ceasefire agreement must be implemented not only in the Persian Gulf, but also in Lebanon. But that didn't happen. So Israel continued bombing Lebanon and is doing that to this day. And Iran is not doing much to protect its proxies in Lebanon. On the other hand, it's rather questionable if it has capacity to do that. It can launch missile strikes on Israel, but that will not prevent Israel from continuing its military operation or invasion, if you will, in Lebanon. I think the Middle Eastern country is doomed, if I may say that, because it's in an extremely difficult position, because the Israeli forces are virtually leveling to the ground southern Lebanon, possibly in the same way they did to Gaza, and the country is not in a position to do anything about it. The Lebanese government and its army is not willing to fight against Israel. But even if there was a political will, I don't think they could do anything, because Israel has a much more powerful military than the Lebanese army. And Hezbollah, on the other hand, is inflicting damage to the Israeli military. What we can see on the ground is that they are launching FPV drones attacks on Israeli tanks and other military equipment. So it does have consequences for the Israeli military, but that does not mean that Israel will halt its military operation in Lebanon anytime soon. So I'm afraid that war will continue regardless of what's happening in the Gulf region.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the strategies at the moment of the main actors are for the US to try and get a deal, doing anything they can to get Iran to sign, Iran to try and frustrate a deal for as long as possible because it politically damages President Trump, and Israel to do as much damage to Hezbollah as they can until someone or something stops them. I mean, is that an oversimplification, or is that broadly what the main actors are focused on?
Well, I would agree with you, and I would also say that Hezbollah is also trying to do as much damage to Israel as possible, although its capacity is rather limited. But whether the United States is really interested in a lasting peace deal with Iran is rather questionable. I don't think it is, because, as I said, it hasn't achieved its strategic goals. So I think the U.S. is just buying time for another round of confrontation. Yes, you're right. So it does cause serious damage to Donald Trump. But even if the Republicans lose the elections and if the Democrats win, and if a new president is eventually elected, a Democrat, it is entirely possible that new administration will eventually launch a war against Iran, because when it comes to strategic decisions and strategic foreign policy priorities in Washington, there's no much difference between Democrats and Republicans. So I think as long as the Islamic Republic exists, it will, from Washington's perspective, represent a huge threat to its interests in the Middle East, and also Israel will always see Iran as a threat. So this war will, one way or another, have only one outcome. So there will be either a winner, or one side will win and the other side will simply have to surrender. That's the long-term outcome. But in the meantime, of course, they will continue this campaign of occasional strikes and the state of neither war nor peace, which reminds me of what we've seen in Ukraine between 2014 and 2022 in the era of Minsk agreements.
Yeah, we do seem to be stuck in that position, don't we? And finally, of course, we don't have a final outcome to this war yet. But from what you've seen from where we are, do you think the conflict as it's been prosecuted so far leaves us in a stronger or weaker position when it comes to trying to prevent future long-term wars between Iran and Israel?
It's hard to tell because the war is not over yet. I think if Israel manages to achieve its goals, Israel and the United States, then Iran, of course, will be in a much weaker position. And it's questionable if the Islamic Republic will continue to exist if they manage to achieve their goals. But at this point, I think we're still very far from a lasting peace. But on the other hand, there was never a true peace in the Middle East over the past 80 years or so. There were always some tensions and always some low-scale or large-scale wars, and I'm afraid that's going to remain. That situation will remain for some time at least. From what I see, according to reports, the United States is preparing and is seriously preparing for another round of confrontation. Israel is also preparing, and Iran is producing missiles, which means that, of course, it's not ready to sign a peace deal anytime soon, but it's waiting for a new round of airstrikes, and it's willing to seriously respond. But the very fact that it still lacks air defense systems means that it will suffer severe damage, as it did in June last year and also in February and March and April this year.
Mr. Mikovic, we thank you for your analysis. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, health authorities are racing to contain a worsening Ebola outbreak in Central Africa as cases continue to rise in both Congo and Uganda. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. A planned US Ebola quarantine facility in Kenya has become the centre of growing controversy, triggering protests, legal challenges and debate over public health and national sovereignty. Here's more.
Police in Kenya fired tear gas and detained several protesters on Tuesday as opposition continued to grow over a US-backed Ebola quarantine centre near the town of Nanyuki. Many residents opposed the project, arguing that Kenya should not bear the risks linked to an Ebola outbreak affecting parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda. Moreover, tensions over the plan escalated last week, leading to the deaths of 2 protesters.
Is that correct?
The center is being built at Laikipia Air Base near Nanyuki. It would be able to accommodate up to 50 people. U.S. officials say it is intended for Americans who have been exposed to Ebola but are not showing symptoms. Anyone who develops symptoms would be transferred elsewhere for treatment. The project has also sparked a legal dispute. The Kenyan High Court judge has twice ordered the government to halt construction and operations at the site. Lawyers challenging the plan say the government failed to meet the latest court deadline. However, President William Ruto has defended the project, saying last week that his administration is doing the right thing. The United States says it is aware of the court challenge and is working with Kenyan authorities to address concerns. Washington has also pledged $13.5 million to support Kenya's Ebola preparedness efforts. The facility is being planned as Ebola cases continue to rise in eastern Congo and Uganda, where more than 500 infections and over 100 deaths have been reported since the outbreak was declared last month. U.S. military aircraft have continued bringing personnel and equipment to the site despite court orders aimed at stopping the project, with additional temporary structures appearing at the airbase. Kenyan officials say the center could also serve Kenyan and foreign nationals, although U.S. authorities have not confirmed that.
Well, the World Health Organization is urging countries in the region to review border restrictions. Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo are continuing efforts to contain the spread of the disease.
No need for this blanket travel restrictions, and it has to be lifted. Because a few countries, by the way, who have done that, so I hope they will reconsider. And Ebola needs contact, and it's not like COVID. So with basic precautions, many countries can prevent a case from coming, or they can manage it as soon as possible.
Well, health officials are warning that the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa is entering a more dangerous phase. More than 560 confirmed cases have now been reported across the Democratic Republic of Congo and neighbouring Uganda, with the World Health Organization expressing concern about the speed of transmission and the growing cross-border dimension of the crisis. Well, as governments review border measures and health responses, questions are growing about whether the outbreak can still be contained before it spreads further. Well, joining us now is Abdullah Tijani, African Liberty contributor from Abuja in Nigeria. Abdullah, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on Primetime. This outbreak now has crossed an international border. Does that mean that it fundamentally changes the response that's required from regional governments?
Thank you for having me. We are at the very critical stage in Africa now, whereby the response that the national government implement will determine the next phase of the outbreak. So currently we've recorded cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and in Uganda. So it's very unfortunate, but it is not the first time that the continent or the region is experiencing this. But like I said, the response of the national government and also government is important for us to know the next phase of this outbreak.
And of course, the WHO is urging countries to avoid unnecessary border closures. Why is that? I mean, this is often the preferred public health approach, isn't it? Why though?
I think it's instinctive for national government to consider border closure when there's an outbreak. The only problem is that kind of approach can be counterproductive. So let's say there's an outbreak like we do have in Uganda in DRC, then Uganda, and the country decide to close their borders. People are connected across borders through trade, through family ties. People would still need to travel one way or another, whether the national government decide to close the border or not. So the problem with border closure is that when people try to travel unofficially, then they miss out. The country miss out on screening travelers. They miss out on getting data, and that is counterproductive, like I said. And at the same time, the affected countries will need medical supplies, which we still need crossing borders. So if a country closes their borders and because of an outbreak, and there is medical supplies that intends to go to the country, that will be difficult. That will be difficult, and it will be easy for the medical personnel to go in. And it will also discourage other countries to report incidents, because if border closure becomes a norm for countries with incidents, then other countries where the incident is happening will be discouraged to report it because they will be fearing economic isolation. So in my opinion, it is why national government can think of closing borders. It is not a lasting solution to contain the outbreak.
And what makes this outbreak particularly difficult to contain compared with, say, previous Ebola outbreaks?
Okay, it's also important to know that this is not the first time that we are this particular strain of the virus. It happened in 2007. But what makes it difficult to contain is that there has not been a licensed vaccine or medical treatment, specific medical treatment for this virus. Just also make it difficult. And also, like we have seen for other strains, people rarely come out to report cases in these communities where there have been outbreak. So that has made it difficult for researchers and medical personnel to gather data and to conduct their research on how to contain this virus.
I mean, there have been varying reports since this outbreak began. I mean, one of the difficult things for people, I guess, is that there are so many people on social media offering their views, and some of them are not qualified, I guess, to do so. We were told early on that this is a virus that isn't easily spreadable. Now there does seem to be some concern. How worried should neighbouring countries be about a bigger regional spread in the coming weeks?
I think it's important for them to worry, for all African countries, especially the neighboring nations, to be worried, because people are connected. People would still need to trade among themselves. So consider somebody in Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa, and we are recording a case in East Africa. So that is something to tell you that it is not just about Central Africa or West Africa, it's about the continent at large. The African Center for Disease Control already listed 10 countries having high risk of the Ebola outbreak. So, but we shouldn't just limit our response to these 10 countries. All countries in Africa where international travel occurs, or international travel happens, have to be very, very vigilant and have to be worried about the outbreak in their country.
Yeah, and what are the key things right now, Abdullah, that will determine whether this remains a regional health emergency or develops into a more serious continent-wide crisis?
This can depend on different factors, and one is if we record outbreaks in other regions outside the Central and East Africa regions, and it can also be if we record cases in major cities in Africa. Let's say, for instance, in Lagos or Nairobi or Johannesburg, for instance. So this will become a global concern. But in my opinion, we don't need to wait for this incident to happen. We don't need to wait for it to have the cases in major cities before it becomes an international concern. We have to think of how to deal with it now globally, and not just when we are recording it outside the continent.
Mr. Tijani, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories shaping the day with Katie Wilson. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome back to Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. Now, Katie Wilson is here with the business. Katie, what have you got on your agenda tonight?
So the White House has expanded its list of Chinese military-linked firms to include Alibaba and BYD. We're going to get more from the car industry over there as well, and some news from Apple that's given Siri a bit of a makeover. So the US has added some of China's biggest technology and electric vehicle companies to a list of firms it says are supporting Beijing's military ambitions. The move, which includes Alibaba, Baidu and BYD, risks raising tensions between the world's two largest economies.
The US on Monday added Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba, internet search provider Baidu and automakers BYD and NIO to a list of companies it believes are aiding Beijing's military. It's a move which could inflame tensions between the countries. The long-awaited update takes the place of a list from early last year and comes less than a month after President Donald Trump met China's Xi Jinping on a visit to Beijing. The list now includes a large number of China's top technology firms, key to advancing Beijing's military and industrial prowess. It reflects Washington's security concerns amid intense geopolitical competition between the countries. In February, when Trump's trip to China had been pending, the Pentagon briefly posted an updated list, but then quickly withdrew it with little explanation. The new version mirrors the withdrawn February list, but also includes China's top memory chip makers, CXMT and YMTC, as well as other tech firms. Alibaba, in a statement, said there was no basis for its inclusion on the list, while Baidu categorically rejected its inclusion. BYD and others didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. China's embassy in Washington said Beijing opposed, quote, making discriminatory lists to go after Chinese companies and that its firms observe local laws and regulations.
While staying in China, the car market is showing few signs of recovery, with vehicle sales falling for an 8th consecutive month. The prolonged slowdown is putting pressure on automakers, including Volkswagen, as they battle weak consumer demand in the world's largest auto market.
Car sales in China fell once again in May. Data from the China Passenger Car Association showed sales were down around 22% from a year earlier at just over 1.5 million vehicles. It marks the 8th straight month of decline. The trade body also forecast full-year car sales to fall 11%, well down from the previous estimate of just 1%. It added gasoline car sales fell largely due to oil price hikes linked to the Middle East crisis. Sales were down just under a fifth to 7.18 million vehicles for the first 5 months. The long slump shows a growing gap between China's headline economic growth and consumer demand for big items like cars. Analysts argue weaker consumer confidence has hurt auto demand. They also cite lower subsidies in a market that is mature after years of rapid expansion. EV and plug-in hybrid sales fell 7.5% from a year earlier last month, the 5th straight month of declines. Exports were a bright spot. EV and plug-in hybrid electric vehicle sales abroad rose more than 112% in May from a year earlier. That's compared with a near 3/4 increase in overall car exports. China's local downturn has hit global automakers at a key moment, especially Volkswagen. The German auto giant has tried to defend its historic position as a leader in China through a faster and more localised EV strategy.
The race to cash in on the artificial intelligence boom is heading to Wall Street. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, has filed for a US stock market listing, setting up what could be one of the biggest in history and adding to a growing queue of AI giants seeking investor backing.
OpenAI has filed for a US share listing. That was according to a statement from the company on Monday. The ChatGPT maker did not disclose the size or terms of the offering and said no timeline had yet been set. Reuters has previously reported that the firm is targeting a valuation of $1 trillion, with a market debut as early as September. At that valuation, OpenAI would set the stage for $3 trillion IPOs in quick succession, posing a massive test of investor appetite for high-growth tech stocks. Elon Musk's SpaceX will be first out of the gate this week. It's set for a potentially record-breaking listing that could see it raise $75 billion at a valuation of $1.75 trillion. Then there is OpenAI rival Anthropic, the outfit behind Claude Code. It said earlier in June that it too had filed for a listing, and has only recently done a funding round that valued it very close to the trillion mark. If that leaves OpenAI to go last, one analyst said there could be concern over whether investors have the appetite for 3 such enormous IPOs in quick succession. Others have expressed concern there could be little money left over for smaller deals. Critics also ask if the ChatGPT firm can sustain its meteoric growth. While OpenAI has said its revenue is growing fast, it has also told investors it doesn't expect to be profitable before 2030. It also faces a growing host of competitors, not least IPO rival Anthropic.
Intel's turnaround effort may have landed a major boost. A report says Google has ordered millions of AI chips from the US chipmaker, a potential breakthrough for Intel's manufacturing business as it looks to challenge industry leaders and capitalize on booming demand for artificial intelligence.
Alphabet's Google has placed an order with Intel for more than 3 million chips in 2028. That's according to the news site The Information Monday, which also reported that NVIDIA is evaluating Intel's technology and running early trials as it considers future orders. Shares of Intel jumped as much as 12% Monday morning to add to the nearly 169% gain so far this year, on the back of signs of steady turnaround progress under CEO Lip-Bu Tan. Intel declined to comment on the report, while Alphabet and NVIDIA did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Reuters could not independently verify the report. The potential order for Google's in-house AI chips would be a major win for Intel's contract manufacturing business, as the company works to regain ground it lost to Taiwan's TSMC after years of management missteps. According to the Information's report, surging demand has led companies to seek out other manufacturers as TSMC tries to keep up with orders. Since Lip-Bu Tan took charge, Intel has secured billions of dollars of investments from the Trump administration, NVIDIA, and SoftBank. It is also working on chips for Tesla. One analyst told Reuters that companies are supporting Intel because it has US-based manufacturing, which is important for relationships with the Trump administration.
Well, Apple is making its biggest AI move to date. The tech giant has unveiled a revamped version of Siri, aiming to make the voice assistant smarter, more conversational, and better able to compete with rivals like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude.
Apple on Monday rolled out a long-delayed overhaul of its Siri voice assistant in a bid to close the gap with big tech rivals and new-age startups in the AI race. During its Worldwide Developers Conference in California, the iPhone maker introduced Siri AI. It's a more conversational assistant with a standalone app and the ability to analyze what is on the user's screen. It can also pull in information from the web. Here's Mike Rockwell, Apple's Vice President of Siri Engineering.
Siri AI uses our new Apple Intelligence capabilities. This includes personal context understanding, app actions, on-screen awareness, image understanding, and access to broad world knowledge. Let's start with something simple but super useful. Where is this exactly? Here, Siri can identify the location of this beautiful shot along the Santa Cruz coast. Oh, cool. Natural Bridges State Beach.
The update comes 2 years after Apple first promised major upgrades, only to see them repeatedly delayed. Now, the changes mark the company's most significant attempt yet to revive Siri, which has struggled to keep pace with OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, and Google's Gemini. One analyst said the challenge for the iPhone maker is to convince consumers that, quote, intelligence does not have to come at the expense of privacy. Apple is leaning on Google's Gemini technology and NVIDIA chips to power its AI push, but it stressed that personal data would remain private, with most processing done on users' devices or through its own system, which is designed to shield data from outside access. Monday's announcement got a mixed welcome from analysts, with one calling Siri AI credible but not earth-shaking.
And finally, from the runway to the moon, Italian fashion house Prada has unveiled a new garment designed for NASA astronaut, taking another step into the space industry and showing there's more than one way for luxury brands to be among the stars.
Spacewear just got a high fashion upgrade. Italian luxury brand Prada has unveiled a new inner garment that NASA astronauts will wear on upcoming missions to the moon. The move highlights Prada's push to become the first major high-end fashion house in space. Its body-hugging suit, created in collaboration with Houston-based Axiom Space, features ventilation tubes knitted into the garment. The product follows Prada's 2024 reveal of a spacesuit for NASA's planned Artemis 4 moon landing in 2028. The move comes at a difficult time for the luxury goods sector. After 2 years of decline, the industry had begun to stabilize. But the war in Iran, which broke out at the end of February, hurt global travel and luxury spending well beyond the Middle East. Prada hopes its new venture will align the brand with cutting-edge technology and maybe one day help it win sales from wealthy space tourists. Other companies such as Under Armour are also entering the race. It's partnered with Virgin Galactic to create space apparel.
That's this evening's business news. Back to you, Guy.
That's one small step for mankind, one giant catwalk for civilization, Katie, perhaps.
Nice. Ba-dum.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, do join us after the break. We'll be looking at Russia, Ukraine. Don't go away.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabon. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro,
Beijing,
Bangkok, Tbilisi,
Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran,
Islamabad,
Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. Now, behind the scenes diplomacy and a shifting strategic stalemate, new details have emerged regarding a quiet back-channel visit to Kyiv by billionaire Roman Abramovich, highlighting ongoing attempts at communication. Meanwhile, on the ground, the war enters a new phase defined by static front lines and intensified long-range strikes.
A quiet visit to Kyiv by Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich has sparked new discussions over back-channel diplomacy. Reports reveal that the unofficial meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky took place in late May, aiming to gauge framework conditions for potential negotiations. While the core details remain classified, both sides have publicly acknowledged the encounter, offering contrasting perspectives on the interaction.
He came to Kiev. He said that I think that he said that I have a message direct to you, and I want to get message and take message from you and to give it to Putin. But he said that it has to be silently, without any kind of public messages. He came and he wanted to give him the message that they are ready to, that they want to understand what we are ready to do. I said, the question is not about us. You are fighting against us on our territory. And I said to him about Donbass, it was the key message. And I said, no, we will not live.
Moscow, on the other hand, characterized the trip as an unprompted, private initiative. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated he was informed beforehand, but maintained an official distance.
He called me and said that he had been invited to Kiev. I told him, well, please, go ahead. What do I have to do with it? He said he wanted to make sure to inform me about this, because it would probably involve some issues related to relations between the two countries.
As political channels stall, the physical map of the conflict has largely frozen. According to assessments, the most significant shifts in territorial control occurred during the first year of the full-scale invasion in 2022. After reaching a peak of 27% in March 2022 and shifting to 19% by September, subsequent military campaigns over the following years fluctuated by a mere 1%. 4 years into the conflict, total Ukrainian territorial losses stand at 19.3%. With the front line locked in a strategic deadlock, both nations have increasingly turned to long-range drone and missile campaigns as their primary tool of engagement. During the recent winter campaign, Russian operations focused heavily on disabling Ukraine's domestic energy grid. In response, during the spring of 2026, Ukrainian forces launched targeted strikes against Russia's transport and export infrastructure in the Baltic and Black Seas, aiming to minimize potential revenues from rising oil prices. This continuous infrastructure war has put immense strain on hardware budgets, international aid, and civilian hubs on both sides of the border. Data from the Kiel Institute highlights a stark divergence in international funding, while military aid for Kiev remains relatively steady at an average of €2 billion per month. Direct financial and humanitarian assistance has plummeted by 80%, dropping to just €500 million. Concurrently, funding allocated strictly for drone technology reached a historic peak of €1.6 billion in the first 4 months of this year alone. As hardware budgets shift, the impact of long-range drone warfare continues to expand across major urban and economic centres. In Ukraine, regional hubs bear the brunt of these operations, with over 1,400 drone launches targeting the capital region of Kyiv, alongside hundreds of tactical strikes disabling infrastructure in Kharkiv and southern ports. Simultaneously, Ukrainian long-range operations have intensified across the border, recording over 1,100 drone impacts in Russia's Belgorod and Kursk regions, while strategic long-range strikes targeted key southern oil terminals and Baltic seaports up to 1,000 kilometers away.
The war in Ukraine then may be entering another pivotal phase. While President Zelensky is rallying support from European partners and continuing to advocate for a diplomatic path forward, fighting on the ground remains intense. Ukraine has stepped up long-range drone operations deep inside Russia, targeting energy and military infrastructure, while Moscow continues its strikes across Ukrainian cities. At the same time, peace efforts remain uncertain. Zelensky recently renewed his call for direct talks with Vladimir Putin, but the Kremlin has shown little interest in such a meeting, even as international actors continue searching for a diplomatic breakthrough. Well, joining us now is Douglas Davis, co-founder of the Ukrainian Alliance for Medical Exchange and Development, joining us from Wisconsin in the United States. Mr. Davis, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime tonight. I mean, frankly, is any of this sort of diplomatic work actually having any effect? You know, the question remains, drones or diplomacy at the moment, which is shaping the war more right now?
I would argue that it's the drone diplomacy. It's the kinetic actions on the battlefield. And to the sort of the numbers that were mentioned in the earlier assessment, the battlefield is not frozen. It's not frozen at all. In fact, the tide has been shifting very, very obviously towards the Ukrainian because of the advancements of the drone wall and the improved short range and mid to long term range strike capabilities that Ukraine have, and with the integration of AI technologies into their systems under the directions of people like Minister Fedorov, that are improving the kill ratios to be 2-to-1 for the Russians in terms of if a Russian is hit within the drone wall, there are two deaths for every wounded. Russians are not accomplishing the same type of offensive capabilities against the Ukrainians. So the diplomacy you're seeing engaged in by Putin through intermediaries like Abramovich, these are all signs that the writing is on the wall. Russia has lost this war. It's a matter of whether Putin can get a golden bridge, a Sun Tzu Art of War golden bridge out, because you look at the way the Russian people themselves speak about it, the Russian oligarchs, the Russian bloggers and Telegram folks. They're not referring to this as a Russian special operation anymore. They're calling this Putin's war. And what they mean when they say that is it's Putin's fault.
And we saw the statement there from President Putin, sort of saying, well, you know, Mr. Abramovich, he called me, he mentioned he wanted to go there, and I said, yeah, you know, do what you like, you know. Your assessment is that's unlikely to be a realistic sequence of events?
No, nothing happens in these domains without the express blessing of Putin. That's face saving, straight up. So.
And, you know, you talk about Ukraine improving its position on the battlefield. I mean, during this summer, do you think Ukraine's also improved its negotiating position?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the real geniuses of President Zelensky. I mean, he's had some difficulties with his administration and sort of their communication sometimes with the West. But when he's at his best, he's a genius comedian. And if you look at his letter to Putin, it's seeded with the type of satire that despite 4+ years of this full-scale invasion, Zelensky recognizes that Russians are on the rope, and he can still approach this with the good humor and potentially offer Putin an off-ramp, a golden bridge. It's at this point up to Putin whether that's satisfactory, and many of us see that as unlikely because Putin has tied his ultimate legacy to this war, and that legacy is one of ruin and destruction of the Russian economy, army, and people. And a man who saw himself to be the fifth great czar of the Russian empires is going to go down in history as the one that destroyed Russia.
Why does Moscow keep rejecting leader-to-leader talks? And do you think Putin will continue to reject those offers?
I do. I personally do believe he will reject them because it is study Russian history. The Russians will only abide a strongman leader. They will give up great freedom. They will suffer and endure great hardship so long as they are provided the security of a strongman leader. And Putin is clearly no longer that strongman. And any semblance of him negotiating, of him backing down, is ultimately, we know very well that there have been internal coup dynamics within Russia going on for quite some time, going back to the Prigozhin and Serovokin coup now well over 2 years ago. So Putin it's as all dictators go. Their grip is firm until it is not.
And do you think, in terms of the wider actors involved in this, do you think European capitals are starting to become more important than Washington in this conflict?
Well, I think there's a shifting of the dynamics, and part of this has to do that this is not just about a war in Europe. This is about a great power come across the globe. And as I mentioned with some of your colleagues on my prior discussion, the thread of this great power competition runs from Russia, through Iran, through North Korea, through Latin American extremist and criminal elements, Venezuela, and in Cuba. There's actors across the globe of what we would call the axis of authoritarians. And for the United States, I think the strategic center of gravity for the United States is really going to be its great power competition with China. And I think there are some in Washington, D.C. who view Russia as significantly weakened enough that it's more for the Europeans to step in and take a role. We have our own complex priorities here in the United States. They're not just applicable to our current administration. This goes back to prior administrations who have openly admitted that they were more concerned about China than about Russia per se. And now, as one who is personally deeply invested in Ukraine, I saw that problematic because I see Ukraine as a very much a linchpin in this global great power competition, particularly now that they are the experts of modern drone combined arms warfare and have many lessons that they can offer to the West in terms of addressing some of the chinks in our armor and the gaps in our operational and doctrinal military structures that we're witnessing in Iran and around the Persian Gulf right now. So the bottom line is that I think it's in everyone's interest to support Ukraine through this. But on the larger global scale, I think that there is actually a shift to put more of the burden onto Europe. But I am very optimistic that the United States has recognized the value of what Ukraine has to offer.
And finally, Douglas, let's talk about timelines here. If we accept your analysis that President Putin is, to use your analogy, losing his grip, I mean, it could still take quite a long time for that grip to be significantly loosened. I mean, what do you think realistically the timeline is now for the end of this conflict?
I'm going to be very careful about making a firm prediction there because it's always strings of contingency. And there's been multiple times over the course of the past 4 years where Ukrainian victory could have been secured. But Russian saber rattling, other type things caused support from the West to pull back. It's one of the reasons why there's been such a strong shift in Ukraine more recently to recognize that they have to take ownership of this fight first and foremost. It's why Minister Fedorov has done many of the things that they've done. General Kirill Budanov, who's now elevated to the head of the president's office, has been instrumental in some of these things. The prediction I would make is that if the West provides the proper material support, intelligence support to Ukraine, this war could be strategically over within the next 3 to 6 months, by the end of the summer. That Ukraine will get fire control or actually seizure control of the land bridge, the Tokmak region between Mariupol and Melitopol, that the Kursk bridge could be destroyed. It's already been structurally weakened. The Russians are taking heavy casualties and hits across Crimea and across the occupied territories of Donbass and Luhansk. It's an untenable situation for them. So I don't see Ukraine necessarily recapturing those regions in that time frame per se. But I see the realities of the war and of Russia having lost this war potentially becoming very clear within the next 3 to 6 months.
Mr. Davis, great to have you on the show. We appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro,
Beijing,
Bangkok, Tbilisi,
Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Good to have you with us this evening. An historic public response is pushing under 16 social media restrictions to the top of the UK government's agenda. While Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces domestic pressure to implement an Australia-style ban, the proposals are already triggering pushback from the US Embassy over free speech concerns. This legislative push comes as the Prime Minister also navigates internal leadership challenges within his own party. Stuart Smith reports now from London.
The national consultation on social media use that closed last month had around 120,000 responses, according to the UK Technology Secretary, which would make it the second largest response to any government consultation in history since the one on equal marriage. That was reported at the Prime Minister's weekly cabinet meeting. According to his spokesperson, it's a private meeting between the Prime Minister and government ministers, but what's released by the spokesperson can offer clues as to the government's public priorities. In this case, Keir Starmer appears keen to demonstrate his government is listening to the calls for action from parents, educators, the police and civil society on the harms of social media, and is ready to implement potential solutions. These could range from restrictions on social media use for children to more blanket measures like an Australia-style ban for under-16s. But the US Embassy in London has pushed back on that idea, saying it's worried about freedom of speech and disproportionate compliance burdens on American companies. In response to that, the Prime Minister's spokesperson says Keir Starmer is focused on what's right for families here and now and into the future. It comes as he tries to convince colleagues to back him in any leadership competition that could arise, especially if current Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, is elected next week to the National Parliament, from where he could launch a leadership challenge against the Prime Minister. In the UK, the governing political party can change its leader, and therefore the Prime Minister, between elections. But any candidate has to receive enough support from Labour lawmakers, and the incumbent Prime Minister says he's going to fight to win. Stuart Smith for A News in London. London.
Pope Leo XIV has delivered a strong political message during a landmark visit to Spain, where he addressed the country's parliament and warned that the world is facing rising global conflicts, political division, and what he called a disregard for human rights. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Pope Leo XIV delivered one of the strongest political messages of his young papacy during a landmark visit to Spain. As the first pope ever to address Madrid's parliament, he warned that the world is facing a profound spiritual and cultural crisis. Leo pointed to escalating conflicts, growing political polarization, and what he described as a widespread disregard for human rights. The speech came amid renewed tensions in the Middle East and ongoing conflicts around the world. The Pope argued that military buildups and increased defense spending cannot deliver lasting peace, saying that while weapons may impose a temporary silence, they can't create genuine reconciliation. Migration was also a central theme. Leo praised efforts to support migrants and urged governments to protect the dignity of those forced to flee conflict and poverty. He said it was essential to offer safe and legal pathways, a respectful welcome, and real possibilities for integration. Lawmakers responded with a 7-minute standing ovation. Now, the Pope also confronted one of the Catholic Church's most painful issues, clerical sexual abuse. Speaking to Spanish bishops, Leo said that the Church must respond with listening, truth, justice, and reparation, and demonstrate a determined commitment to safeguarding children and vulnerable people. Later, he met privately with 6 abuse survivors, although some victim groups criticized the process and said not all survivors were represented. Beyond war and migration, the Pope is increasingly making artificial intelligence a defining issue of his papacy. In recent weeks, he warned that AI must serve humanity, not replace it. His message from Madrid was clear. A more powerful world does not automatically become a better one. The real test is whether that power actually serves the people. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
The United States has added several major Chinese companies, including Alibaba and BYD, to a Pentagon blacklist over alleged military ties, a move Beijing has condemned as discriminatory and coming just after weeks after this landmark US-China summit. Our correspondent reports now from Beijing.
The U.S. Department of Defense has designated dozens of Chinese firms as Chinese military companies, among them technology giant Alibaba, electric vehicle maker BYD, and search engine Baidu. Washington says that the 3 companies are affiliated with China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, which oversees the country's technology and industrial policies. The updated list now includes 188 firms, up from 134 previously. Companies on the list will be barred from consideration for U.S. defense contracts under rules set to take effect later this month. Alibaba has rejected the designation, saying there is no basis for its inclusion and has vowed to take legal action. China's embassy in Washington has condemned the move as discriminatory. The expansion comes less than a month after President Trump met Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Beijing for a 2-day summit aimed at easing trade and technology tensions between the 2 countries. Manir Makhtoom, A News, Beijing.
The United Nations Security Council has held a meeting on Afghanistan, focusing on women's rights, humanitarian concerns, regional tensions, and the country's political and economic situation. The meeting also heard calls for continued engagement with the Afghan authorities, while stressing that such engagement does not mean recognition of the current government. Well, our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more now from Kabul.
The Security Council meeting on Afghanistan mainly focused on the extension of the United Nations assistance mission in Afghanistan known as UNAMA. and the wider situation in the country. Senior UN officials told the Council that Afghanistan is currently free from large-scale armed conflict, but warned that the sustainability of peace will depend on the policies and structure of the Afghan authorities. UNAMA's acting chief, Georgette Gagnon, said engagement with the Afghan authorities remains important for monitoring developments in the country, but emphasized that this does not constitute recognition. The official also called for the removal of restrictions on women's education and employment, saying these measures have damaged Afghanistan's economy. The meeting also discussed the widespread return of migrants. According to the UN officials, around 5.9 million people have returned to Afghanistan since 2023, placing major pressure on the country's society, economy, and national capacities. Several countries also addressed the meeting, with Russia supporting the extension of UNAMA's mandate, China calling for girls' secondary schools to reopen and for women's access to education and work. India condemning Pakistan's airstrikes in Afghanistan as a violation of international law and sovereignty. And the United States urging stronger action on counter-terrorism concerns and closer review of UNAMA's mandate renewal. The meeting showed that the international community remains focused on Afghanistan's stability, women's rights, humanitarian needs, economic challenges, regional tensions, and the future role of the United Nations in the country. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
Kyrgyzstan is no longer on the European Union's aviation safety blacklist, ending restrictions that had been in place since 2006. Well, officials in Bishkek say the move reflects years of reforms in civil aviation. More now from our very own Fariza Kalamazina in Almaty.
Kyrgyzstan has been removed from the European Union's aviation safety blacklist, ending nearly 2 decades of restrictions on the country's airlines. The decision was approved unanimously by all 27 EU member states, and according to authorities in Bishkek, all airlines certified in Kyrgyzstan have now been removed from the EU air safety list. For many people in Kyrgyzstan, the decision carries practical meaning. Since the ban was introduced in 2006, traveling to Europe often meant longer routes, extra costs, and transit through neighboring countries, most commonly Kazakhstan. And many there see the decision as long-awaited news. The restrictions were introduced in 2006 when the European Commission banned 27 Kyrgyz passenger and cargo airlines from operating across EU airspace. Brussels said at the time that Kyrgyzstan's aviation oversight system did not meet international safety standards. Media reports at the time suggested that the decision may also have reflected a broader tightening of aviation safety measures in Europe, following several international reviews and major air disasters, including the 2004 Flash Airlines crash near Egypt's Sharm el-Sheikh, which killed 148 people, most of them French citizens. Officials in Bishkek say the country's removal from the blacklist follows years of reforms in civil aviation, including changes in safety regulation and oversight aimed at aligning Kyrgyzstan's aviation system with international requirements. Authorities now hope the decision will eventually open the door to new routes, stronger transport links with Europe, growth in international air travel, and an increase in tourism. Fariza Kalimurzyna, Almaty, A News.
Well, by hosting Venezuelan acting President Rodriguez in Istanbul, Turkish President Erdogan seeks to deepen cooperation between the two countries in the fields of trade, energy and mining. The talks come as Ankara looks to expand its economic and diplomatic engagement with Latin American countries. Our correspondent Adam Morrow reports now from Istanbul.
Turkey and Venezuela are looking to strengthen their growing partnership, following talks in Istanbul between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez. Rodriguez, who was visiting Turkey at Erdogan's invitation, was greeted with a formal welcoming ceremony before the two sides held bilateral and delegation-level discussions. According to Turkish officials, Erdogan reaffirmed Turkey's support for what he described as the friendly people of Venezuela, stressing Ankara's commitment to expanding cooperation across a range of fields. Particular emphasis was placed on trade, energy, and mining, areas that have emerged as key pillars of the bilateral relationship in recent years. The two sides also discussed their shared target of achieving bilateral trade volumes of $3 billion annually. Several top Turkish officials attended the meeting, including Vice President Cevdet Yılmaz, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Energy Minister Alp Arslan Bayraktar, and Trade Minister Ömer Bolat. Relations between Ankara and Caracas have expanded significantly over the past decade, driven by growing cooperation in trade, energy, and investment. Turkey has become an important commercial partner for Venezuela at a time when the oil-rich South American nation has sought to diversify its international economic relationships. The two governments have maintained close political dialogue, with Erdogan and former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro holding frequent contacts and supporting efforts to deepen economic ties. Monday's talks served to underscore Ankara's broader strategy of expanding relations with partners outside its immediate neighborhood. They also highlighted Venezuela's interest in attracting new opportunities for cooperation, especially in the trade, investment, and energy fields, amid ongoing economic challenges. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
France's parliament has recognised state responsibility over the use of a banned pesticide in its Caribbean territories. Well, the decision relates to long-term environmental and health damage in Martinique and Guadeloupe.
France's parliament has formally recognised state responsibility for the use of the pesticide chlordecone in its overseas territories of Martinique and Guadeloupe. The decision follows decades of concerns over environmental and health impacts linked to the chemical, which was used on banana plantations between the 1970s and early 1990s, despite earlier restrictions in mainland France. Chlordecone, a highly toxic insecticide, was later banned globally under the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Studies by health authorities, including France's National Agency for Health Security, have linked long-term exposure to the substance with serious contamination of soil and water, as well as increased cancer risks, particularly prostate cancer. Although the pesticide was prohibited in mainland France in the 1970s, its use continued in the Caribbean territories until 1993. This has led to ongoing health concerns in Martinique and Guadeloupe, where reports suggest a large proportion of the adult population has been exposed. The new law does not immediately establish full compensation, but it sets out a framework for further investigation and possible reparations. A government inspection mission is expected to visit both territories to assess damage and propose compensation mechanisms. Officials have acknowledged that earlier warnings about the chemical's risks were not adequately acted upon at the time. However, the scale and form of compensation remain under discussion.
The global airline industry is facing renewed pressure from rising fuel costs, aircraft shortages and ongoing engine problems as airlines grapple with the fallout from the conflict involving Iran. Well, the IATA has nearly halved its forecast for global airline net profit this year, cutting its estimate from $41 billion to $23 billion, despite expectations that industry revenues will exceed a record $1.1 trillion. Now, the company says higher jet fuel prices and restrictions on key air routes in the Gulf region are increasing operating costs, forcing carriers to fly longer routes and consume more fuel.
Unfortunately, I think there will be some carriers that will find this high fuel price very difficult to cope with. You know, they won't be able to recover the increase in costs because of their weak commercial position. And it's going to be difficult to see how, in an environment like that, all of the airlines that are in that sort of scenario, weak balance sheet, weak financial performance, and where the competitive position is not very strong, I think they are going to struggle.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Estonia for the Ukraine-Nordic-Baltic Summit. Well, Zelensky met with Estonian President Alar Karis before joining the broader regional summit later this afternoon. During a news conference, Ukrainian President said that Europe needs a strong voice in peace talks. Ahead of the main event, Zelensky also held separate bilateral talks in Tallinn with the Prime Ministers of Finland, Latvia and Sweden. The President's spokesperson confirmed that discussions focused on regional security. Russia has launched fresh attacks on Ukrainian cities, killing civilians in Zaporizhia and the Kharkiv region. Now, the strikes come as Ukraine targets Russian oil facilities. Meanwhile, the European Union is preparing a new round of sanctions against Moscow.
A Russian drone attack on Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhia has killed 2 people and wounded 23 others, according to regional governor Ivan Fedorov. The strike hit near a bus station, damaging vehicles, shops and nearby structures. Forensic teams worked at the scene, where authorities also recovered a damaged object believed to be part of a drone. Russian forces also targeted the Kharkiv region, where officials said 4 people were killed and more than 20 injured in missile and drone strikes on Tuesday. The attacks came as Ukraine intensified strikes on oil facilities in Russia, part of Kiev's campaign to raise the economic cost of Moscow's war. Russian authorities have reported fuel supply problems in several southern regions following the strikes. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov acknowledged certain problems, but said measures were being taken, while blaming panic buying. Diplomatic contacts also remain on the agenda. President Volodymyr Zelensky said Roman Abramovich had acted as a go-between for messages between Kiev and Moscow. At the same time, the European Union is preparing a new round of sanctions against Russia. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the proposed measures include 18 new listings targeting Russia's military-industrial complex, human rights violators and propagandists.
The European Commission is preparing its 21st package of sanctions against Russia, targeting key sectors including energy, banking and the fishing industry. Well, the measures are intended to increase pressure on Russia's war effort in Ukraine. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said existing sanctions are already having a significant impact on the Russian economy.
Today we are putting forward the 21st sanctions package. We focus on the sectors with the highest impact, that is energy. It is financial services and crypto. Trade, and this time it includes for the very first time fisheries. And we are banning the entry of former Russian combatants into the European Union.
The United Nations says the closure of Gaza's main entry points is worsening the humanitarian situation and is urging Israel to reopen them without delay. Well, UN officials say the organization rejects the restrictions and continues to call for unrestricted humanitarian access.
OCHA reports that following missile attacks towards Israel since last night, the Israeli authorities closed the Kerem Shalom, Kerem Abu Salam crossing today, which has been the only crossing into Gaza that had been operational for cargo over the past 2 weeks. However, humanitarians were allowed to collect cargo from the Palestinian side of the crossing. Israeli authorities also closed Rafah crossing. OCHA stressed that people in the Gaza Strip rely on a steady flow of humanitarian and commercial goods from outside. The UN and our humanitarian partners work hard to maintain a sustained and predictable flow of supplies despite restrictions. Such efforts cannot be sustained if crossings remain closed. Against this backdrop, civilians and civilian infrastructure continue to be exposed to Israeli airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire, resulting in reported casualties and damage. Under international humanitarian law, civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected.
A French military fighter jet shot down a drone that entered the airspace of the NATO member Latvia from Russia on Monday. The Latvian Prime Minister said that they were working together with Ukraine on drone defense technologies, but did not say who launched the drone. Some drones have entered the airspace of Finland, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. Well, Latvia's defence minister said no one was injured and there was no damage. Thousands of people have rallied in Albania's capital and along its southern coast against a luxury resort planned by US envoy and US President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, warning it could damage a protected wetland. Well, protesters say the site is a vital habitat for flamingos, seals and nesting sea turtles. The pink bird has become the symbol of the campaign, with the demonstrators carrying inflatable signs reading "Flamingo Revolution." The country's Prime Minister has defended the development and said they will go ahead with the plans.
While when it comes to the project that has created all this worldwide outrage, it is about a private property. It is not about a land that is public and the Albanian government is giving by selling out the country. It's a private property. It's an expression of interest based on a private deal between private parties.
A court ruling in France is drawing renewed attention to New Caledonia's independence movement and the relationship between Paris and its overseas territories. Well, the decision comes after a lengthy and closely watched legal case that has sparked debate over justice, political activism, and the legacy of colonial rule.
For nearly 2 years, Kanak pro-independence leader Christian Taine faced criminal charges that took him thousands of kilometres from his home in New Caledonia and placed him at the centre of one of France's most closely watched investigations. Now, a Paris court has thrown out the case against Taine and 13 others, citing insufficient evidence, fueling debate over how France applies the democratic standards it promotes abroad. The case stemmed from the May 2024 unrest in New Caledonia, which began over proposed changes to voter eligibility rules. The protests later turned violent, leaving 14 people dead and prompting France to declare a state of emergency, deploy security forces, and transfer dozens of detained Kanaks to mainland France. At the time, Taine led the Field Action Coordinating Group, known as CCAT, which had been created by a pro-independence party. Prosecutors alleged that the group operated as an organised structure seeking to destabilise New Caledonia's public services, administration and economy. The case included serious allegations linked to complicity in attempted murder, destruction of property and armed theft. However, the court found no concrete evidence that Taine had coordinated violence, including through secret contacts, messages or phone calls. This made the length of the process central to the controversy. If the core accusations could not be proven, why did the investigation last 576 days? Critics argue that a long investigation, detention far from home, and public accusations can become a form of pressure even without a conviction, especially when directed at a leading pro-independence figure. That makes Taine's case more than a criminal proceeding. It is also tied to France's handling of independence demands in its overseas territories. Critics argue that France can present itself as a defender of democratic values, while using legal and administrative tools to pressure pro-independence movements in its overseas territories. In that view, the Taine case is not only about a failed prosecution, but about how political pressure can be exercised through the language of law. In media interviews, Tain described his detention as deeply damaging, saying a year in solitary confinement was very, very hard. His lawyers called the original procedure an attempt to silence a politician. New Caledonia, also known as Kanaki, has been under French rule since 1853 and remains on the UN list of non-self-governing territories, where independence demands have long shaped politics. That makes investigations against pro-independence leaders politically sensitive. For that reason, the case is also seen as a test of France's approach to its colonial legacy.
At least 11 people have died after a migrant boat capsized in waters off Malta, the charity Sea-Watch said on Monday, while around 50 others were rescued at sea by a fishing vessel in the area. Well, according to the Italian Coast Guard, the boat left the Libyan coast carrying around 60 people and sank about 45 nautical miles southeast of Malta. Rescue teams recovered 10 bodies. Sea-Watch said the number of missing people is still not clear. The Italian Coast Guard said it immediately sent a patrol vessel to the area. The powerful earthquake that struck the southern Philippines has killed at least 40 people and left a trail of destruction, disrupting schools and transport. Well, rescue teams are continuing to assess the full scale of the damage as communities begin recovery efforts.
Rescue and recovery operations are continuing in the southern Philippines after a powerful earthquake struck off the coast of Sarangani province, killing at least 37 people and injuring more than 100 others. The magnitude 7.8 quake triggered landslides, damaged buildings and disrupted transport links across parts of Mindanao, with General Santos among the worst affected areas. Homes were left tilted and buildings suffered collapsed walls and roofs as emergency crews continued searching for missing people. Authorities say the victims were killed by falling debris, structural collapses and landslides caused by the strong shaking. The earthquake struck shortly after schools reopened following the summer break, affecting thousands of educational facilities across several regions. In some areas, students and teachers were forced to evacuate classrooms as the tremor hit. Transport and public services were also disrupted. Operations at General Santos International Airport were temporarily suspended for safety inspections, while several domestic flights were cancelled. The offshore quake prompted tsunami warnings in the Philippines, Japan and Indonesia. Although tsunami waves were recorded, officials said they were too small to cause significant damage, and all warnings have since been lifted. Tremors were felt across large parts of the southern Philippines and in neighbouring Indonesia, highlighting the regional impact of one of the strongest earthquakes to hit the country in recent years. The disaster comes less than a year after a series of deadly earthquakes struck the Philippines, underscoring the country's vulnerability to seismic activity along the Pacific Ring of Fire.
Businesses in Mexico City's historic centre say ongoing protests are reducing trade and foot traffic just days before the 2026 FIFA World Cup opener. Well, members of the CNTE Teachers Union have maintained road blockades demanding higher wages, pension reforms and greater government attention to social issues. The camp is located close to an area being prepared for a FIFA fan festival ahead of Thursday's opening match. President Claudia Sheinbaum says her government will not repress protesters and expects World Cup events in the Mexican capital to proceed peacefully. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says any future negotiations on the Russia-Ukraine conflict must take full account of Europe's security interests, particularly those of Eastern European countries. Well, Kallas stressed the nations with direct experience of Russia should have a voice in shaping Europe's approach to both the conflict and any future peace agreements, speaking on Monday. Now, her comments come as European leaders leaders seek a greater role in diplomatic efforts to end the war, following talks between the leaders of Ukraine, France, Germany and the United Kingdom in London. While major EU powers such as France and Germany favour accelerating political engagement, several Baltic and Central European states argue that conditions for meaningful negotiations with Russia have yet to be met. Well, Ghana says it is making progress in restoring degraded forests, with more than 23,000 hectares of damaged land brought back under rehabilitation programs last year. Now, officials say new surveys show encouraging survival rates for the planted trees, though results vary across the country.
Ghana is continuing efforts to restore forests and degraded landscapes as part of wider environmental protection plans. In 2025, more than 23,600 hectares of deforested and damaged land were put under restoration through enrichment planting and forest plantation development. The program is aimed at rebuilding forest cover, protecting biodiversity and improving resilience in areas affected by land degradation. Officials say a recent survey of forest reserves showed tree survival rates of between 65 and 85% in the high forest zone. In the northern savanna zone, where conditions are more difficult, survival rates ranged from 40 to 78%. Authorities say the figures point to progress, but also show the need for continued monitoring and maintenance.
In 2025, a total of 23,600 hectares of deforested and degraded landscapes across the country were put under restoration through enrichment planting and forest plantation development. A recent survival survey conducted in forest reserves within the 2025 T4L planted areas presented a success range of between 65% to 85% survival success in the high forest zone and 40 to 78% in the northern savanna zone.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us again tomorrow for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.